It is 4:30, and it's good to begin on time. And I don't say much to begin with. That's very important. So we give people some time to kind of filter in. Today's presentation is about the college essay, and the college essay presentation. I think it's always interesting. I've been doing some version of this or another since 2001, and I find it always the essay process is exhausting, but it's always interesting because students get a lot out of the essay process. Some students use it as catharsis. Some students really like to have something that they're proud of. Obviously, outside of it being a factor in the application process and so forth, the essay is something there's a lot of baggage that goes along with it. Every year, some magazine or other will come out with the best college essays or something like this. So it does tend to be a lot of there's always a lot of drama around the essay, and that is something that doesn't change from one year to the next. And there's a reason for it. The college essays are kind of shrouded in mystery. People don't tend to understand exactly what's needed as a result of the colleges being really cagey and not too clear on things. So it all makes sense that the college essay is something that's not that's not no it's I guess not it's misunderstood more than anything else. So this presentation should go a little bit of a ways toward clarifying things. So building the college essay. What we're going to be going over today, just as a matter of an agenda, we're going to start off with frequently asked questions, go over the common application essay, and really go into some depth with that. With the supplemental essays and the UC essays, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with those today, but I will go over them enough. And then there'll be a lot of detail on them at a later time. But mostly today is the common application essay, the common app essay being the main personal statement that 90% of the colleges that you apply to will use on the common application. And even schools not on the common application, they'll take some iteration of the common app or other. Um, Supplemental essays are the essays that go along with every school's application. Why do you want to come to Michigan? What do you find compelling about the curriculum at the University of Wisconsin-Madison? Why Stanford? Things like that range from the bizarre to the conventional, and everything in between. UC has its own thing going on, which we'll go over, and then we'll go over our process, timeline, and so forth. But to start off with frequently asked questions about the application. Um, okay, so FAQs. Number one, how many essays will I write total? Probably on 10 applications, about 20 to 25 essays, I'd say. You'll write 4 UC essays, the Common App main personal statement. So now we're at 5, and probably but depending on the number of applications that you're doing, as well as the number of the type of schools you're doing, and what type of intensity the supplements carry, between 1 and 5 supplemental essays per application. Stanford has 3 lengthier ones plus 5 50-word ones. Rice University has 2 lengthy ones and then a couple of short ones. Brown has a bunch of madness, and then you've got like combined programs like BSMD programs, and they're a nightmare. But more or less about that amount, 20 to 25 total. In addition to schools like MIT that have their own applications, Georgetown that have their own applications, and what's called the coalition application. But in any case, 20 to 25 essays on average is what you're going to be writing throughout the process. How much do essays matter? Did I skip one? No, I didn't. I don't like the way that these flow, and I went over this last night. In any case, how much do essays matter? Is this going to make a difference? Do colleges even look at the essay? Yes. Does it matter for everyone? No. With students that are going to be straight admits to easy peasy schools, like a school that's ranked outside of the top 100 in the country, a student has perfect grades, a 1600 SAT score, and a full pay. They're not going to have to, come out of pocket a nickel to the school. Then, probably anything is going to wind up flying. And similarly on the other end of the spectrum, students with a 2.0 and a 980 on the SAT, aren't going to get much of a look at Harvard. And you got to look at everything, I guess, just to make sure that there's nobody that's too connected that you're denying, or at least you have a legacy, kind of a courtesy deferral or wait list. But still, the essays aren't going to matter that much. For everyone in between, they matter in varying degrees. Smaller schools tend to use them a lot. Liberal arts colleges tend to use them a lot. UC uses them a lot. There's a lot of content that we get in the UC essays that are super significant to UC. And schools where students are on the bubble. And at the top schools, just about everybody, unless you're a straight denial, is going to be on the bubble. Nobody's a straight admit. So the essays are going to matter. They're going to show the student's personality. They're going to show who the student is. What else are they going to show? Going to get to that in just a moment. But they will matter. Not going to matter the same for everybody. But in a good number of cases, they're going to matter a lot. In some cases, they're not going to matter a lick. In all cases with UC, they will matter a significant amount. I'm always surprised at how many people hear that UC's essays don't matter when they really are a massive part of things. Other questions, frequently asked questions. My grades are bad. Can I get a stand for the great essay? No. Can a bad college essay negatively affect my application? Yes, especially the places where you're on the bubble or UC, which is basically all top schools. You don't want to have a bad essay either with even a safety school, but still, it's going to impact it at the schools where the essay is going to make a difference in general. And as I said, that's generally going to be UC schools where you're kind of on the bubble, not a definite denial, not a definite admit. What is more important in the essay itself, content or writing skill? Both are important. Although private schools tend to like the writing skill a little bit more, public schools like UC, all content driven for the most part. We like to tackle both. We like to have a good story well told, especially in the common application essay. And I'll get to the story and everything that goes along with that in just a moment. But we want good writing skills and we want good content. Content for UC and for publics, that's usually the king. Writing skills, articulation, and being creative, clever, weaving a story, that's something that tends to be a little bit more dominated by private schools, but not a clear distinction on those. So those are the frequently asked questions that are kind of more housekeeping questions that I like to get out of the way. The real kind of meaty questions, the ones that are more involved, is kind of like, how do you write the thing? How do you make the essays good? How do you tell a storyline? And specifically, what should I be doing in my case? The last one specifically, what should I be doing in my case? We deal with that on an individual level, obviously. But the other questions, it's nice to get everybody on the same page at how things work. So all of these are what we're going to address. And we start off with the common application, the main personal statement. And as I said, we move into UC, then we move into the supplemental essays. So beginning with Common App, these are the prompts for the common application essay. Again, the main stock standard personal statement, 650 word max. We want to get it somewhere between 615 and 650, right in that neck of the woods. Do these prompts matter? No. Will AOs look at what prompt you selected? No. Will you even look at what prompt you selected? Oftentimes, no. As I've mentioned to many of you individually, these are all, more for the most part, some variation of tell me about yourself. Talk about your story. Talk about an obstacle. Talk about an accomplishment that showcased a period of growth. Talk about something that's a total topic of your choice. Those are the primary questions here. There's also stuff that's a little bit more creative, but not tons of students will do a question, an essay specifically on the lessons we take from the question, the belief or idea one. That's the one that not a lot of students will wind up doing. But still, the general gist is something about you. Tell me about yourself. But tell me about yourself is very broad. It is barely kind of opening everything up. Tell me about yourself. Well, let me tell you when I was born in the hospital, and I'll give you a painfully detailed autobiography that goes over the last 16, 17 years of my life. Nobody wants to hear that. So how do you really kind of tell a story, tell people about yourself in a way that is going to be compelling and is going to fit the expectations of AOs and be successful even beyond just fitting expectations? Well, there's no universals in college admissions, and this is especially not the case because I've given you all illustrations of things that don't conform to these principles in the sample essays that Gabby sent out. But the the I'd say this is close to being a good general set of rules of thumbs. These are three necessary and sometimes sufficient, as you can read, elements of a good Common App essay. And I've said this to several of you already. In my opinion, good Common App essay, these are the components for the most part, unless you really get lucky. A storyline that takes place in high school that showcases a positive trait or positive traits about you. Um, Not always the case, and I'll give the illustrations that prove the rule in just a moment. So what is a storyline? A storyline is essentially this. Here's the main character. Here's an experience the main character has had. Here is how the main character has changed, has grown. It can be anything small. It can be a massive sea change in the way that they understand the world. It can be a slight change in perspective, but typically a story involves a character or characters. I talked about it earlier today with a student. We talked about the movie Remember the Titans, where the character, as we put it, is the whole Titans football team that grows throughout the experience. But that's a story. You got a protagonist, a main character. They change through a series of experiences that they've been through. The human condition, the human experience. Um, a storyline shows maturation and change. It shows development. It shows somebody's process. It shows how you can think through obstacles, how you can disentangle problems. And that's important on principle, I would say to AOs, that you're having somebody where you're seeing the way that they disentangle problems when you're applying to a school, a college where that's what you're going to be confronted with, problems that you have to deal with. They want to see your process. They want to see, how you work through things. These are much more interesting, I would say. Usually the storyline essays, or a storyline is generally more interesting than a snapshot essay, a day in the life of somebody, a montage essay, which is different different experiences that you're showcasing all overlapping to develop a particular theme, or a metaphor essay. And in the illustrations that Gabby sent out, let me open this up. Oh God, I hate doing this. Okay. Um, the first essay that we have in these main Common App essays, as she sent it out as a PDF, is this essay, which I've spoken to several of you about. Let me see what we got. Okay. Oh, will great essays make up for great? Ooh, that's a good question. I'm gonna answer that in a second. That's a good question. I was hoping that we weren't gonna have like audio problems or anything. Okay, good. But I'll get back to that in a second. But the first essay that we have here, I love this essay so much, and it doesn't fit the storyline at all. It's a girl using the metaphor of a potato talking about herself, and she got it at Caltech. And this is the essay I always come back to because it's weird and wild and wacky and so interesting, and I love it. But it doesn't have a storyline. So there's exceptions to the rule. Another essay, which I'm sure none of you remember because nobody was interested in college admissions 8 years ago, but in 2016 there was an essay that made the rounds on like all the morning shows and like newspapers called the Costco essay, and it was about this girl's journey through Costco and how she wound up learning a lot, or how she indulged her curiosity going through Costco, and it was meant to showcase how curious she was. I thought it was okay. A lot. I mean, she got into five Ivies. That was the big thing. So obviously, it didn't hurt with five schools. But it was solid. It was good. It was interesting. I like Potato Girl more. But Costco essay was good, and it didn't have a storyline where you have a protagonist, an experience, and growth. But these are also very lucky, as I said before. You need the storyline, I think, unless you really get the metaphor and you really, really, you hit on something good and clever and interesting. Which even then, it's just easier, I think, more effective to go with the storyline. But still, that's the thing is that there are no 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 universals with anything with this. How am I doing this now? Do I have to go? Can I go from current slide? Is that good? All right, good. I didn't go back. Okay. So exceptions to the storyline rule, there's a bunch out there. But you want to do that. I think the storyline works better. It's you get a lot of juice out of it. You don't need it. But we'd want to talk about it if you wanted to do something else. We'd want to see if the metaphor was good because you can come off. I mean, like yeah, like putting together like a recipe of who you are. I mean, that could be like, no. So in any case, we'll talk about this on an individual basis. So a storyline could be like a 5 hour presentation. Um, that primarily takes place in high school. So the storyline where we are, putting you on display and putting the story on display, where you've had growth and reflection and development and maturation. We wanted to take place during high school. If this main storyline that has been this really good growth experience that is showcasing who you are in a microcosm, in a story, it's showcasing who you are. We wanted to take place recently. We don't want it to say like, I'm going to give you like the most significant experience of my life that happened in second grade. Well, it's like, no, you can't have done this happen like 9 years ago. We can use earlier stuff like stuff from second grade as backstory, as context, but we don't want it to be the main. We don't want it to be the main. It's like, what have you done? Nothing of significance since then. Alternatively, or similarly, you don't want it set too soon, too recently either. Then it's kind of like, oh, it's not believable. Like, oh God, you had this watershed experience where you've come to see the world so differently, and it happened last week. It's just that kind of stuff doesn't. It's like the like when great sporting event. Oh, the best game ever played. No, that's what you think now. You need the distance in order to get the perspective. You need the distance for the legitimacy on the part of the reader. The sweet spot for the experience that we showcase tends to be 10th or 11th grade. Anything like that's going on in summer before 12th, it's like, that's a little too recent. Anything in ninth, we could have that as the main storyline, but it tends to be maybe a little bit early, but you get the idea. 10th, 11th. So storyline, main character, an experience they go through, how they learned, how they grew, how they changed their perspective, how they matured. Um, that takes place somewhat recently that showcases positive traits about you. So, like, oh my God, what did I do with the animation? I'm so bad at PowerPoint. Sorry. So let's just go through these without all the mess. With the essay samples that I gave out, I think I've used these guys enough where I think I can remember exactly which ones they were. Essay one, Potato Girl, sense of humor, love it. I mean, that is just clever, creative, an absolute delight. Essays 2 and 7, persistence and grit. Essay 2 was the Muay Thai kickboxer from Fremont. Essay 7 was the girl that confronted her adult bully. Persistence and grit. Those were like, yeah, those were a little bit, those that was some interesting stuff going on in both of those. I like the Muay Thai one better. Essays 3 and 4, empathy and connection with others. Three, I think, was the girl that was bicultural, Chilean and Chinese. Really, really good with that. I think that was her, right? Essay three, essay three in these examples. No, essay three was the girl that started the girls' soccer team. But that's an excellent one. That's one of the best ones that I've seen over the past several years. Essay four, let me see. That's the cyclist. Essay four was the cyclist that found his community of other cyclists. Essay five was the student that was the Chilean Chinese student that had the an understanding of the world, her bicultural heritage, and really found herself. Essay six was the painting essay, or was it charcoal or pastel? That was great. Creativity on display, very good. Essay eight, the student from the high school publication in China, or Hong Kong, commitment to social justice. That was just awesome. And essay nine, change maker in the community. That was the environmental science one. So all of the essays had at least one, if not multiple, positive traits that wound up coming out of them. And positive traits can be anything really that are going to be relevant. I mean, you don't want to like talk about your abs or like talk about like how much you can like shoulder press. That's not going to be relevant to you. I mean, maybe like, I guess you have to be like football player, but otherwise not going to be relevant. But something that's going to make you, as we say later, like a good roommate, a good lab partner, a good collaborator, somebody that can provide a different perspective. These are the positive traits. And as I say, dozens of other ones work too. Curiosity, leadership, passion, trademark. I'm putting that in because just to remind myself, passion, try not to use it anywhere in the application, that word, because that word is just been it's like for the past 10 years it's been a little bit overdone, and it is something where it's like, oh, passion, we'll get anything else, even any synonym matters, but passion is just something that even among admissions officers, it's like if I've heard it once, I've heard it too many times today. But coming back to the main point of all of this, we want positive traits to come through. So a storyline, transformation and growth during high school, relevant, recent, that showcases a positive trait or positive traits that'll be relevant to somebody that's in admissions and higher education. Um, but but um, let's go over these essays in particular. I wanted to make sure that we had time to kind of to go over them a little, because it is you don't get an idea of what a good essay is unless you have illustrations. And I think the illustrations that we've chosen are very good. These are all from ours from like the past 5, 6, 7 years or so. I used to use all relevant information changed. Um, uh, um, but I used to use like Johns Hopkins best essays, but they're these I can like kind of talk through the process a little bit while still keeping anonymity. Um, so with just some reflections on these essays and why they're chosen and why I think that they're good. Some I like more than others. But essay one, Potato Girl, no great transformation, no storyline. We don't have a beginning. We don't have a before and an after. We just have like potato metaphor of who I am. But it works, man. It's cool. It's quirky. It's weird. It's different. It's creative. But if it wasn't cool and quirky and weird and creative, would it work just to have that metaphor? No, not necessarily. You got to have the interestingness in order to make something in order to pull off something like that. And we've had students do it. I mean, a couple of kids will do it a year. One essay that I used to have on there was one but it was more of a transformation where the student talked about the trains that she took during a ballet summer program around New York. So this one, not necessarily unique, but uncommon, that you can get away with no great transformation, but still, still pops. Okay, next one. Um, Essay two. This one has great content. This is the Muay Thai one, the kickboxing girl. Um, the transformation isn't there that much because we've got really good content. It's unusual content, it's unique content, it's something that you don't usually see. You don't usually see like first person stream of consciousness fight narrative essays from students in like the Mission or Irvington or American or something like that. It's neat. And it's good. It really shows some cool grit and some cool persistence. Fabulous, and the essay was executed well. The transformation wasn't necessarily there. It wasn't there as much. We didn't have as much of a story. We had a good narrative that really showed a lot about her. But the content was kind of king there, and as I say in a little bit, the content isn't as important as what you do with it. So we don't need earth-shattering, truly unique, Nobel Prize type content. But the better the content is, the less you got to play around with it. This content, I think, was good enough. Girl that was small, that trained intensely in a fighting sport, that really showed a lot of cool grit and persistence in the way that she trained. That works with that content. It's something that's enough to carry the day, where you don't need as many of the twists and turns and like the narrative. Um, Okay, SA3. This was the soccer one. I think this might be one of my favorite ones. This is the girl that started off with she started off playing on a boys soccer team in her high school because her very small high school didn't have a girls soccer team. So she went through, kind of enduring being the outcast on a boys soccer team, went through that, became part of the gang, started her own girls soccer team at the high school, and led that. I mean, the execution was great. It was cool. It was neat. A great intro, good outro, good transitions throughout. Really good use of language. And unique content. I mean, really, just starting. I mean, just I couldn't even imagine that. Just really shows just so much about who she is as a person, who she is currently, who she was as a student back then. SA4. This is the intersecting storylines. This is the biker from this is the biker that went through the the bike race in Iowa. and then used the lessons of collaborating and applied them to his Boy Scout Eagle Scout project with his bike repair kit that he gave to a Boys and Girls Club. I like that the intersecting storylines here, and that is one, I guess you could call it a trope of a Common App essay, a kind of structure that you could use, where you have intersecting storylines. You've got one story that informs another. We had one of those last year for a student that was admitted to ED to Claremont McKenna, where he spoke about his the leadership that he learned at Starbucks and how he applied that to his Boy Scout troop. That was kind of foundering at the time. So yeah, the intersecting storylines where you've got one storyline setting up another one. That's kind of a standard Common App sort of structure, or trope maybe. Among others, like the strength that turns into a weakness, the weakness that turns into a strength, learning to do something because you love it, or rather than just loving the goal, learning to do something for others where you once were selfish about it. So a lot of different structures, a lot of different kind of like, structural themes, I guess, that can come out in Common App. But in this one, the kid with the bike repair thing and the Iowa trip, really nice with the intersecting storylines. SA5. This is the girl with the multicultural background. I love the personal transformation in there. The way she starts off and she really just lays. She just like she calls herself on the carpet. She really just yeah. I was that kid. I was just to kind of give you this. That was okay. Icebreakers. The common enemy is shy children who dread sharing personal information with strangers. Love the intro. Great hook. Great. You're immediately compelled. Tell us something about yourself. My teacher would say, smiling wildly, I'd respond, I'm Chinese and Chilean. I can speak three languages. Here I'd pause to look around and bask my peers and press expressions. Yeah, let's see. Oh, there was one section where it said, yeah, I was that student. Okay. Oh, no, it was. It's actually pronounced Santa Maria. I know. I was that kid. So she just lays herself out as being completely unaware. And then we have this development, this personal development, where we've got her growth, her understanding of herself, and the transformation there. I just love it. It's so self-aware and so clever. Oh wait, PowerPoint. Okay, gotta go back to this. Okay. Essay 6, that's the one with the student that did the painting and the self-portrait. Um, what I wanted to bring up a call about that is that you will notice there like the real impressive visuals, the real impressive descriptions. And that's something that you get a lot out of that, out of art essays, out of music essays, where you don't get them as much out of like navel gazing meditative essays, more academically oriented essays. There's another one in there, the intense storyline where it's like Prokofiev's Wolf. Not as much quite the same thing, but we've got a lot of like auditory metaphors in that essay. In the sixth one, the art, the self-portrait one, great. And one thing, really, what I wanted to say was, I like art essays because you can usually you've got the sensory imagery, you've got the sensory language where it's much easier to draw the reader in than it is when talking about something that's a little bit theoretical. um you know it's just you can make the language just like sing so much more. um Essay 7, this is the one where it starts off with Prokofiev's Wolf, and the girl talks about like, then I punched a girl, and then I confronted my bully. It's a little aggressive. I'm not, in retrospect, I like it, because it's different, but a little aggressive. But different strokes for different folks. I think it still works. But it is heavy. It is intense. It does show, confronting an important social issue and confronting your kind of your accusers, and really showing who this person is, that they have a spine and that they can speak for themselves and they can stand up for what they believe is right. So I think it works in that level. um Essay 8, this is the student that spoke about her high school publication in Hong Kong and how she needed to make certain she needed to kind of meet, I guess, censors halfway and meet her own writers halfway in order to get points across in her newspaper. It's just the content is really well executed. I like it a lot, and the student that wrote, she was a an English major that went on to an Ivy League school. So she's a good writer, but just having to deal with censorship as a high and she as a high school student, it's so fun, very just so interesting. And that she's not only dealing like a real world issue, but like a real world issue, like the freedom of speech being throttled. So having to deal with that and having to navigate that, and having to deal with it as it is, not some idealistic, like, if I was in charge, this is what would happen. It's like how to deal with this in a real deal. You've got people that are, that are censors that have important positions. You have a threat. How do you deal with that? Love it. Um, SA 9, this is a student, great intro. One of my favorite intros. What is it like? Gas mask fully on and sign raised. Love it. This is the kid that's the environmental science kid, where we've got the setup and the backstory of protesting. I think it's the Cargill concrete plant. I don't know if it's still there. But I don't think it is. I think that's right. That the essay's about that. I don't think it is, but I haven't. Now I'm thinking about it in years. I haven't heard the thing on the hill. But anyways, the Cargill concrete plant, I think is what it is. And that intersects with the environmental science club that the students started. So yeah, intersecting essays again, really, really nice. With yeah, good intros, good content. Let me see. Let me take a couple of questions here now. Okay, good. All right. Number one, will great essays make up for poor or less than average grades? I think it's going to be that's the first question. So just kind of like I'm stopping for questions now for just a moment. Will a great essay make up for poor grades? It depends on what the content of the essay is, and it depends on how poor the grades are. If the essay is great, I mean, if it's like one of these essays and the students got like all C's, then probably not. If it would be like, an essay that talks about how a student, I mean, God forbid, but I had to have to deal with like a passing of a family member or something like that, and that is what would kind of give a little bit of context to some grades. Then yeah, it'll make up for it. But the content is what's going to wind up being there and making up for the grade. And it also depends on the level of grades. If we're talking about like and everything else, if a student has like it's like every other year we have a student admitted to the University of Chicago that they got average grades, or not average grades, but grades that are like, 4 or 5 Bs. But solid classes, essays really, really good, creative, clever, and everything else hits on all the right points, and they're admitted. And in that case, I think the essay helps. But they got to have everything else going on too. If the student is just like, bunch of C's, no AP classes, criminal record, there's only so much that you can wind up doing with an essay. So yeah, I would say that it all depends on how heavy. We're talking about a couple of B's. Yeah, probably still looking good. And the other thing is too, we're talking about different levels of schools. So if we, I mean, yeah, an essay can help. Get a couple, say yes, straight B's, 3.0 GPA. Harvard is not going to help, but help you get into. Could it help with a school like 3.0 unweighted? I'm trying to think. Pacific, St. Mary's, Santa Clara, maybe Gonzaga. So yeah, it could help with a school like that. So yeah, it can always help. It depends on what the content is though, and it depends on how rough the grades are. Yeah, answered live, and I'm done. Okay, if our high school gives us a mandatory project for all students, can we still write about our experience of that in the essay? Yeah, totally. Like Boy Scout troops give a mandatory project to all Eagle Scouts, and we have a ton of essays on that. And I think that this is a good time to bring this up. There are only so many experiences that people can have, and there's only so many positive traits can be showcased, and there's only so many themes. So in some way, you're going to be derivative on like everything. It's going to be there's not any sort of there's just because a project is mandatory and other people are doing it or you're required to do it doesn't mean that you couldn't have it as an experience for really intense growth where you showcase a certain amount or a certain sort of skill set or development, or positive traits throughout. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what like if you had a capstone project, you were like, the what is it in the Palo Alto schools, Beam. If you got a project or multimedia in Saratoga, if you've got a project like that, still, yeah, if it shows development, you can pick the most mundane thing in the world, and as long as there's something in there that gives some substance to the student, and gives a real perspective on the student, then you're, I think you have a winning essay. So yeah, totally fine to do that. An experience works if it's a transformative experience and it showcases the positive traits. And you indicated that it was in high school, so I think that that works well. Um, so I kind of call this part Riley's part because this is his sort of baby and some of the things that he put together, and I like using it because it really just makes so much sense. And I kind of go over the general aspects and strokes of what makes the essay good. But he really, as like as a former college English professor and somebody who's been doing this for a long time, has his own way of looking at it that I think makes sense to a lot of people. So to kind of give you an idea of what we should be looking at by the component of the essay, by the writing, and kind of like no particular order. I guess maybe an order of priority. But plot development, the storyline. How are we going to showcase the storyline? As I said before, what we're really looking for is storyline that takes place in high school that showcases positive traits. As far as the storyline goes, we want the obstacle, we want the conflict, we want the friction to happen in the first two paragraphs. Why is there friction? Because there's got to be change. And whenever people change, it's the result of friction, not the result of, being comfortable, usually. The obstacle to this storyline should be introduced early. The student's going to overcome the obstacle throughout the essay, but it's not going to happen like that. It's not believable. The student needs to overcome this obstacle throughout the essay. It should resemble, as Riley puts it here, a plot mountain, a plot triangle, where you've got ground setting, rising action, conflict resolution. You see the process, you see the disentanglement of problems, you see the growth, you see the maturation, and at the end, you realize that the hero's journey is not an easy one. So, along similar lines, the personal transformation. We want to see that the student has grown. We want the student at the end to be different than the student at the beginning. As I said, a storyline is basically here's a person, here's something they encountered or an experience that they went through, here's who they are now. And as Riley says here in Riley's words, the story can be mundane, but we need to have meditation on it. We need reflection on it. We need insight on it. We need to see something more sophisticated. And as I said earlier, the better the content, the less you need that. The more mundane the content, the more you need the interesting, sophisticated reflection, insightful meditation, and so forth. So a little bit of a balance there. It's like cooking. You've got a wonderful steak with perfect marbling that you paid $50 for at Safeway. You want to treat it. You don't need anything else on it. You get the flank steak at like Food for Less. You got to really doctor it up. Okay. Um, Persona. Admissions on this is the truth. Admissions officers are asked in several circumstances. It's kind of like the ultimate decision on a student. Would you want to have this person as a roommate? Would you want to have the person as a lab partner? The persona that you exude throughout the essay should indicate that you would be a good roommate, should be a good lab partner. You don't want to sound arrogant. We don't want this as a place to list accomplishments. This is not the Common App essay is not like a resume. UC is kind of like a resume. Common App is not. The supplements. Why do you want to come to Michigan? Kind of resume-ish. Common App is not. You want Common App to be, friendly. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I don't know how much I like I think it was the seventh essay, the one that's the Prokofiev's Wolf ones. It could be a little. If you got me on a bad day and I was reading that, I'd be like, I don't want to be around this person. So maybe that's the ultimate kind of barometer. But yeah, you want to be friendly, want to be likable. It doesn't have to be like, robotic, but you want to be somebody that's not going to be a negative Nelly. Pacing. This is something that high school students typically have a little bit of this. Something that adults typically have trouble with. But with creative writing or nonfiction, or any narrative, really, there are certain places that you want to fly over at 35,000 feet. You just want to speed through it and kind of give a survey. And there's other times where you need to come in and land, and have some details in there and to sit down on the topic and to really tease out the details, really stretch out the elaboration that you have on feelings, on how you wound up getting around this particular obstacle, on how you wound up thinking through this problem, on how you wound up, considering this person's feelings. And that's really what we're here for. Me and Riley and the essay consultants, they're the writers. They're probably the ones that are better at it than I am. But yeah, making sure that we know that the when you need to sit down and detail something, that we do it, and that's part of the pacing, and that's super hard to do. Um, you have to be very, very conscientious of what your objective is and what you're trying to get across with the writing. Um, but again, like I said, that's kind of what we're here for also. Um, as I've mentioned before, content. With Common App, we want this to be personal. We want the student to be understood as a community member, rather than somebody who's an academic. Really, in my opinion, the student is, I think, best showcased as typically you want the academic stuff to be in the supplements, because you're going to have so many questions that are going to ask, what do you want to major in and why do you want to major in it, that if you have that in the Common App and the supplemental essay, it's going to be, well, you're going to look one note. That said, I mentioned this to a student earlier today. There was a great essay that we used to use as a training mechanism, as a training device. And It was called Copper Fittings, and it was this kid's. The whole essay was how he learned so much about life through his grandfather or his father's workshop and dealing with copper fittings, and doing building in there. And that was how he showcased. He also showcased an interest in engineering and things like that. That works. That sort of curiosity, even though it's related to academics, it still works. Similarly, if you have an academic experience that serves as the backdrop of the essay, but you have personal drama playing out in front of it, that works also. We can't, though, have an essay that's all about why I love computer science. It's got to have more personal stuff than that. And it's got to have less computer science related stuff, because we need that for the supplement. I say this later on, that we don't want the Common App essay to do all the heavy lifting. And that's one reason why you don't need it to. You have the supplemental essays in there. So the Common App, it needs to be something that is showcasing the student as a person. We want the content to be good, but the topic is less important than what we do with it. Still, back to the steak metaphor. Flank steak, you got to pound it, you got to doctor it up, got to season it. Filet, the steak that's really marbled, that's the stuff you don't do. Just throw it on the grill with some salt and pepper, you're good to go. Um, Organization, not quite as important usually on the students' end, because they just kind of kind of ignore that. But on our end, the organization is significant. It's one reason that I think it's having another editor is necessary in something like this, because it's very hard to keep, it's hard to keep things straight and clear. We want the chronology to be clear. We want the storyline to be clear. We want there to be appropriate transitions among the paragraphs. Um, Clarity is super important. And lack of complexity, I think, is important, because you are getting these applications read fast. Penn came out several years ago and said they don't spend any more than 8 minutes on any given application. Two readers, one for the objective stuff, the other one for the more personal stuff. But each one 8 minutes, the whole app. Read it at the same time. And you said that's all you're getting. You can't depend on somebody to go through the essay 3 or 4 or 5 times to get the gist of it. You can't depend on people to get really subtle, nuanced metaphors. You need to kind of be primary colors. You need to be sophisticated. That's the juggling act, right? I mean, you need to be sophisticated. You need to show you're smart, but you can't have it be such a layered, textured, nuanced essay that it takes a semester-long class in critical theory to understand. You want the reader to get it within that 8 minute, read it once or read it 1.5 times. This love it, and then move on. So yeah, we need it to be clear because of the constraints of the constraints of the read. Something else, language use. One thing I didn't put in here that I wish I did was Intros and outros. The outros aren't as important. The outros just got to make you feel like the conclusions. You got to make you feel comfortable that everything's been tied up. But the intros, they got to pop. Um, yeah, there aren't many on that good essay list. There are not, you know, not many bad intros in there. Um, Additionally, with the language, we want vivid language. We want the essay to be. We don't want like we don't want repetition. We don't want basic language. Yeah, that said, we don't want flowery language either, or so-called purple prose. You don't want obscure, 5 syllable words. You got to look up in the dictionary to figure it out. Doesn't make any adult feel good. You want to be using the whole show don't tell approach, where when we have something, especially that we're elaborating on, it's much better to give the showing than the telling, to bring the reader into the scene, and to really to have them sort of experience it with you. But yeah, so again, a balancing act. Can't be too flowery, can't be too ornate, can't be too embroidered, but you can't be too simple either. You need a little bit of texture in there. You need some vividness in there. Um, and this is what I said I was going to come back to. The Common App essay does not need to do all the heavy lifting. One of many pieces. And in the case of essays like Stanford, like Brown, Yale, Princeton, Caltech, trying to think of the schools. I mean, even like I'm trying to even Santa Clara has like 3 involved essays. You got a lot of pieces you all got a lot of other parts of the app that are going to be filling in the gaps. In the case of some schools that don't have SUPs, like Northeastern or Case Western Reserve, still I would say that you wouldn't you don't want to cram your whole life story into the Common App essay. You still want to leave it alone, you know, and have the main primary storyline that we use be the centerpiece of that. Um, just as far as just to kind of go through this, with the intros before we wind up going on to the supplements. Let me see. This one, good intro, funny. It's not something that explodes on you, but it's the rest of the essay is good enough where she didn't need that heavy an intro. Great. Fight, the referee exclaims. I'm hooked. Yes, I've scored. Yet as I look around, no one cheers or acknowledges it. Great. I'm hooked. What's the mystery? What's going to happen? My quads burned with 60 miles to go on that 100-miler day. It's like, still, you know, good, compelling, vivid. Cycling's not my thing, but still, I'm inclined to read more going through all of this. Icebreakers, the common enemy of shy children. Love it. Your lighting has no contrast. The lines aren't straight enough. Cowering embarrassment. I wondered how my once favorite pastime had turned into a nightmare. Good, vivid, compelling dialogue opening it up. Having the dialogue open it up, very, very good. It's quick, it's punchy, very, very journalistic. Opening up in media res in the middle of things where you back out and kind of disentangle the problem as the first part of the essay goes on. Good approach too. In third grade, I met Prokofiev's wolf. Not totally apparent what's going on, but the reader's enchanted. Um, Amplifying student voices since 1998. That's okay. That's okay. You'd figure with the journalism essay a little bit better. Gas mask up and crayon etched sign firmly raised. So all of these, for the most part, even the ones that were like, I mean, compared to the really good ones, they were but overall, still compelling. Um, Okay, so with Common App, we're in the throes of meeting about Common App, of outlining the Common App essay. As Claire Shadler, one of our essay consultants, said to me about 5 or 6 years ago, students will always be juggling something. So I know that we're about to jump into AP season, and then you're going to jump into final season. But after that, in July, you're gonna might jump into summer program season where you're like, locked away in Cosmos or at SSP for a whole month. Then after that, you come back. You're in the first semester of senior year, but you're gonna have a lot to juggle with that. So there's always juggling going on. I know Common App is not going on at the most convenient time, but up until January 2nd, 2025, nothing's going to be totally convenient. So we chip away as we can with Common App. Yeah. Supplements in UC aren't that bad. Common App's a nightmare for the most part. as I've mentioned to some of you also, and this is such a weird thing, you gotta go through Common App and go through the editing process to understand what works. Every year, we'll have 2 or 3 students that'll go through the whole Common App process, go through 8 drafts, um, get the essay good, like a 9 on a scale of 10, 8.75 on a scale of 10. And then like a week before the deadline, scrap the whole thing, rewrite it from scratch, which is just like the most frustrating thing in the world, but it almost always turns out good, where it's better than the previous version. And the one thing I can think of that explains this is I think that you need to go through the whole editorial process once to understand what Common App and the colleges are looking for. And then once you've got that down, it's much easier to replicate it. So I'm not advocating that at all. I think it's just the most inconvenient thing in the world for me. But it is something where you got to take the idea all the way through, if for nothing else, to see how the essay is developed. And then and I mean I won't let a lousy essay by. So if it gets by me, it's going to be a good essay. But this is something where there's a lot of room for interpretation. All right. Anyways, moving along to the supplements. The supplemental essays, about every school in the Common App is going to have them. Notable exceptions: Northeastern, Case Western Reserve, Ohio State, Middlebury, among a lot of other schools that don't have any additional essays. Those additional essays will give a range of a lot of different questions, like the bananas ones. Chicago, among the hundreds of others. What is square one, and can you actually go back to it? Where is Waldo really? Find X. Chicago has a linear accelerator underneath campus. Put a bunch of objects in it, smash them together, and see what comes out. I mean, just a bunch of weird. Compare apples and oranges. So Chicago's got their uncommon application, always goofy, always wacky, always funny. We'll get to how to address that in a second. Another one that's always interesting is Wake Forest. Give us your top 10 list with no context as to what that top 10 list is all about. Just list 10 things and let's see if we can figure it out. Creative and reflective, one of North Carolina's old ones, which I like. Tell us about a goal you hope to achieve in 10 days, 10 months, or 10 years. So creative, reflective, cool, but not like Where's Waldo? Scripts, you have funding for your own startup. What'll it be? Neat, getting to the students' motivations. And then we have the more straightforward and mundane ones. And this is what the majority of public schools are going to look like, as well as some schools that just don't have the most creative prompts in the world. Northwestern, this is an old one. But there's enough like it. Wash U has one like that now. Hopkins has one like that. Cornell, very straightforward with majority of their prompts. Why Georgia Tech? Why Michigan? Why Purdue? That's the way that the majority of the straightforward essays are going to be. Tell us about your major and why you want to pursue it here in between 150 and 650 words. And with all of these, we outline them with stuff that's specific to you, what you want to bring in, how you want to introduce things, what aspects of the school do you want to discuss, that are going to be relevant. So, we lay this all out, but still, it's not the easiest thing in the world, but especially because students will have so many of them that they have to deal with. The way that we typically address them is that for the traditional prompts like the Cornell and the Michigan, and why do you want to come here and why should we let you, we find the overlap between the school and what the student has that they can offer the school and what the school offers, and then it's kind of a dance back and forth, hooking with one of the experiences from the student's background that fits the school, showing how the school fits that experience, showing how the student will take advantage of other experiences, and back and forth. That's the standard way, of kind of working it up. This is what you have. This is what I have. This is how we meet in the middle and how we'll take advantage of what's there. For the creative prompts, I think that you have to match the level of creativity with of the question with the creativity that we have for the essay. Like, every year I'll shoot down a Chicago essay because it's just not weird enough. If you got a weird Chicago prompt you're responding to, you can't have like an argumentative 5-paragraph essay. You need to come different. And when we give outlines and jumping off points for Chicago, it's always weird. We'll pick a couple of different experiences the student has had, see what will fit into some of the weird questions they've had in the past that you can use, and give illustrations. But the Chicago essays are always a little bit strange. But the point is that you're matching the level of creativity or unusualness of the prompt with the level of creativity of your response, or you're just not getting that. If you don't do that, you're just not getting the question, you know. And if you're not going to be creative, you at least have to be interesting. A rule for life. Um, So, speaking of creativity, let's talk about the exact opposite of creativity, the University of California and their essays. So we've gone over the Common App essay, and the Common App essay is it's personal, it's reflective, it's intellectual, it's got to be sophisticated, but it can't be too sophisticated with the language. It's got to be detailed, but it can't be detailed in too many different places. It's just so many different things that you have to deal with Common App. And with the supplements, a little bit easier. Like I said, the creative ones, they're weird, wild, and wacky, but we'll give you jumping off points and guidelines on how to execute them. The more straightforward ones are straight shot. Um, UC is about as much of a straight shot as you can get. UC gets 140,000 unique applications, and they're not looking for creativity. It's basically like, give us the answer to the question. So this is generally what the University of California will look for. I say generally, but it's not generally. It's like legally, this is what they look for. Like legislatively, this is what they look for. Specifically, this is what they look for. They have to look for these things. Um, the left-hand side of the slide is stuff that generally can't be addressed in essays. The right-hand side of the slide is what can be addressed in essays. Outstanding performance in different subject areas, special achievements, improvement in academic performance, special talents, educational prep programs, academic experiences, not really geographic locations so much, but the rest of them definitely so. And this is what we go over, this is what we detail in the UC essays. And how do we get that into how do we detail this in the UC essays? By the activity statement that Gabby has been rattling you for the last couple of months. That's how we build these essays, is by the stuff that you've done, which should be on the activity statement. Um, these are the prompts that we're replying to, and these are what the UC is trying to get at with each of these. The first prompt, basically leadership. What does leadership mean? How many people you're actually leading. You got to quantify how many people you've led. You want to show your growth as a leader, but the more important thing are the deliverables, how many people you've been in charge of. Creativity. Any person has a creative side. UC is really mostly interested in what you've done with that creative side and have you applied it to something practical. So if you've done something that is a massive mural on the side of a public library in downtown San Jose, super cool. If you've done something where you've produced calendars that are raising tens of thousands of dollars for the World Wildlife Fund, super cool. If you're just like dreaming up different ideas of things and not doing anything practical with them, it doesn't matter. They don't want to see that. They don't want to hear about your process. They want to see how you've taken something and done something with it. And that can also entail our awards. So one big thing with the creativity essays is students will typically have like scholastic art awards that they'll talk about in the essays. Number three, talent. Similar to creativity, you want something that's going to have measurable talents. You want to give deliverables, you want to give objective results. There are some talents that are more important and impressive than others. But in all cases, you want to give some kind of proof and support as to what they are and why they're so important and why it's going to matter to you. See, or you want to give context to how important and impressive they are. That's more the thing. Um, Educational commitment. This is the fourth UCSA, and it basically asks the ones that are going to be relevant to the majority of you. How have you taken advantage of various? Oh, and pardon me. Just chat. Drop a question in the chat for anything on your mind. I'm not really. I don't. Every time I try and do the raise hands things and call on somebody, it never works. So drop a line in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll answer if you could be so kind. With the but with the talent, we want to make sure that we have deliverables with educational commitment. we want to make sure that what we're speaking about is going to be typically an educational prep program, something that you've done over the summer, something that you've done in school that's going to give details on the first part of the question, how you've taken advantage of a significant educational opportunity. For all students that do engineering or CS, they should do this question, number 4, as well as number 6. Most students in our area, thankfully, don't have number 5. Um, uh, um, uh, Number 6, though, that's typically where you're going to be speaking about your interest in engineering, computer science, and the like. Um, the 7th UCSA is about community service. Again, we want to show how you've served the community, but we really want objective stuff. How many hours, what you've done, what you've produced, how you've developed things. And the last UCSA, the 8th one, we really shouldn't do. If you're doing that one, it means you don't have good content for the other ones. With all of these, there is and these are we have to pick. We pick 4. They're 350 words apiece. Like I said, we look at the activities and draw from the activities, and that's how we develop the content for this. There is a very stock, boilerplate, straightforward way of addressing these essays. Number 1, the intro. It gives some context and motivation. So, for instance, if we're talking about academic commitment, why you're interested in computer science or engineering, the intro needs to give the background and motivation. 2 or 3 sentences at the most. The majority of the text should be committed to deliverables. Content, 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 content. What have you done? What have you achieved? Give us names of classes. Give us levels of awards. Speak about how you've grown. Speak about how you've gotten more interested in the field. Speak about how your curiosity has grown, but showcase the content and the deliverables more than anything else. The conclusion should be looking toward the future, big, bold dreams and aspirations in the context of what UC wants. So you always want to, say that you want to change the world for the better by way of your UC education at the end of these essays in some way. And make it relevant to UC. Why is this going to be something that UC would want to know? Leadership is really big with UC. If you have leadership, we'll use that. If you led others, we'll use that. If you've got a significant leadership position, varsity captain, ASB or class president, editor in chief, drum major, we'll use that. Um, uh, uh, as I said, computer science and engineering students almost always do the educational opportunities, speaking about educational prep programs and why this major, why engineering, why CS. You kind of need to do that to showcase your skill set to UC. And everything else, you just have to make sure it's quantified. The creativity essay, quantify the deliverables. The talent essay, same thing. Community service, talk about the hours, speak about how you may have effected change in your community. Yeah. Common mistakes: not trying to find the achievements, not providing the examples, not talking about big future goals, and not talking about how you will kind of feed into UC's philosophy of being the rising tide that lifts all boats, changing the world by way of your UC education. Um, we'll go into this in more detail. Riley will go into this in one of his presentations. But the UC essays are they're unique. They need detail. They're very, very practical. They're very, very utilitarian. We need a little bit of personality in there, but it's not Common App. Okay. Um, gosh, almost on time. So our next step in our process, we don't have much of the pre-writing that needs to be done. Maybe a couple of students. We have to develop the frameworks for the essays and then go over them with the essay consultants. For Common App, when we develop this guy, just so you know, it'll be 4 to 6 drafts, more like 6 to 8 drafts. I don't know why I put 4 to 6. 4 to 6 weeks, 6 to 8 drafts usually. The Common App essay is a pain, but we got to get it out of the way. UC starts on the heels of the Common App essay. So as Common App is getting wrapped up, UC we begin. We've got some that we're, I mean, we've got outlines of about, well, we've got outlines of quite a few UC essays now that we're just not getting out because we don't want to confuse people. But once AP season is over, and your Common Apps are more underway, that we'll get them out. With the early action, early decision schools will begin on the tail end of UC. We want to have the Common App and UC essays completed by July 1. And we need 2 schools that are not UC nailed down by June 1, as this all sets the calendar for the rest of the year. And I'll follow up via email on finalizing these and so forth. But it's really it's protecting you, the students, from yourselves in many ways. Because a lot of you guys are going to be doing CS and engineering, and that means a lot of you guys are going to be doing 5, 6, 7, 8 schools, or you're going to try and get them done by the early action deadline. And we got to pace ourselves if we're going to do that. So by June 1, we want to make sure that we have 2 schools not UC finalized. I'll confirm and make sure we're all on top of that. And Riley and I are both on top of this. By July 1, we want to have UC and Common App completed. That should be totally doable. UC is 4 essays of 350 words apiece. Common App takes a long time, but it's something that we're starting it early enough where 4 to 6 weeks should be plenty. July 1, we want to get those put to bed. If they're not completed, then you're only going to have time to work on about 4 November 1 deadline applications with the supplements. If they're not done by August 1, you'll only have time to work on like 2 of them. By September 1, we want all the early action, early decision colleges nailed down. That shouldn't be that much of an issue. Mission San Jose's deadline, Irvington's deadline for that is usually like September 9th, so we get it a week early. If we don't get a Common App and UC done by September 15th, we'll only be able to develop like one 11-1 application. I mean, we just wouldn't be able to handle it. It's just hard for us to develop things that quickly and make them good. There's a lot that don't require essays, but you want to get the ones that require essays in. By October 1, we want to have all the colleges finalized on the LCCDB. But we're moving well toward getting the colleges, nailing down a couple of schools. When we have that, we'll if we can get 2 schools done by the end of the summer, plus Common App plus UC, you're ahead. But that's easier said than done. I will do the results for this year, the presentation for that. I don't know, because I still haven't figured out if I want to wait for there to be waitlist movement from UC, which this year in particular is going to come late because UC's SIR deadline is May 15th, because the FAFSA took a long time to open. So UC's deadline to deposit for seniors has got pushed back, which usually means waitlist movement will get pushed back because usually colleges will only take kids off of wait lists when they see how many students have SIR'd. And the deadline is usually May 1. So I'd usually have those numbers, but I'm not going to have them this year. And UC is waitlisting so many people that I want to make sure I've got everything. UC was great this year, though. Private schools were really good. No Stanford, no HYPS, but real good privates, good early, good regular, surprising with like Wellesley, like 3 girls into Wellesley. Riley's also going to have several essay presentations. I'm like, as always, I'm the idea guy and the big picture guy. He's the one that understands execution better, and we all have our strengths, don't we? All right, questions and answer. Okay, good. Great. This is a nice one. Can you talk about recommendation letters? Let me talk about letter of recommendation right now. Get them requested by the end of May, por favor. We would like, and we see this on the timeline that we have on the LCCDB, we want letter of recommendation 1 and letter of recommendation 2 to be requested by the end of May. Why? Because Cupertino and some schools in San Jose and Fremont and Palo Alto will have the popular teachers taken up by the end of May. you got to get them requested by then. It's just and there's somebody won't, and they're gonna want like a real then they're why didn't you tell us? Here it is. So yeah, but we've got that on the LCCDB. Shirley's gonna harass you about it. I harass you about it in all the meetings, but you got to ask them before the beginning of May. Um, the question here, recommendation letters. Does it have to be as tailored as the essays or is generic okay? Well, you should ask this to your teachers, and all of them will say generic is all I'm doing, unless you go to like a school where you pay a lot and they're going to have to be tailored to every individual school. But usually, teachers are going to write one letter that'll go out to all the colleges. It'll usually be to the admissions office type letter. And that's standard. That's not something where as a college, you think that a teacher is going to tailor a letter to you in particular. So I'm just kind of kidding with all of that. But yeah, it's going to be generic. It's going to be a standard LOR kind of format that they're developing. The content is going to wind up being, the this is what's going to really be significant though. It's not going to be how the content meets the university's needs. For letters of recommendation, let me try and think what else. It would be good to have one from the left brain, one from the right brain, one that's a STEM teacher, one that's a humanities social science teacher, preferably both from an advanced level year like an AP course, and preferably from sometime recent, like 11th grade, where you've had them for at least a full year. But ultimately, what we really want are 2 letters of recommendation from academic subjects that'll be the most glowing possible. Uh, and ask by the end of May, because again, people will get snapped up super easy, super quick. Um, what other questions do we have? Um, anything on your mind? Okay, good. More. I still have scenario. If summer internship faculty research gives you a strong letter of recommendation in STEM, can that replace one of the school teachers' LORs? No. Great question. Letters of recommendation are strictly written by teachers that have taught the student in high school. And that's going to be reinforced by the way that Common App works and the way that like Naviance works, that the letter of recommendation request will go through Naviance, usually, if your school has Naviance, and only the teachers that teach there will be on it. But the letter of and you can get around that, but the letter of recommendation does need to be written by a high school teacher. And it's going to be, so yeah, the college professor, a college teacher, can serve as a third letter of recommendation. They can serve as an external letter of recommendation. They could not serve as one of the primary letters of recommendation. If the student can't secure a STEM letter of recommendation, I wouldn't say that's a disaster unless they're applying to a total tech school. I mean, I say that, we would want in a perfect world, one left brain, one right brain, one STEM, one humanities. But ultimately, when you look at the schools that you applied to, you'll be surprised how many don't allow for letters of recommendation, um, or give you the option for one. Like UC doesn't allow for letters of recommendation. Most publics won't allow for letters of recommendation. Michigan will allow for, I think, one or two. USC limits it to one. The fancy schools will want two. And in the case of a lot of tech schools, Harvey Mudd, Caltech, MIT, they will dictate that you need one from STEM and one from humanities, social sciences. But I'd say probably 75% of the other time, you'll need one letter of recommendation and have the option to add others on there. Yeah. Um, good question. And preferably, when do we need the letters of recommendation to be ready? Well, when the application goes in. To be frank, the teachers aren't. I mean, most of the time, the teachers aren't going to get them done until about a week before the deadline, which always makes everybody not stressed at all. But the teachers will get them in about a week before the deadline. You will be able to submit the application without the letters of recommendation being in. You will be able to submit the application without the transcript or the test scores being in. Transcripts, test scores, LORs, external stuff usually gets about a week or so cushion to come in, even after the deadline. That's not always the case. In the case of Texas, you want it in by the deadline. In the case of Michigan, historically, you need everything in the office by the deadline. But more often than not, you get about a week to 10 days cushion. That all said, though, even if the letter of recommendation hasn't been submitted by the time you submit the app, like even if it's 2 weeks before the deadline, still submit the app. The letter of recommendation will follow it in. The transcripts will follow it in. All right. Student in a school club for 3 years. Can the teacher who was the club advisor for 3 years write one rec letter? If they have not taught the student before, the rec letter would not be something that I would suggest, because the letter of recommendation is going to have, let me just see, hold on. There's the pardon me. Let me just see the Common App LOR the Common App LOR requirements, because I believe there's actually the verbiage in there of something having to do with, let me see. For the entry point of the classroom, intellectual curiosity, school details, compared to other students in their class, rate this student, how long have you known them in what context, attach a list of courses in which you have taught this student, including level of course difficulty. And when you see, I mean, this is, let me see, this is and I've shown this to you before, so, it's not like breaking new ground showing you this. But this is the PDF of what the LOR is going to look like from the teacher's standpoint. There's the Common App LOR. You can tell that this is designed for somebody that's taught them in a class. And as I said, there is the exact, attach the course to. So yeah, it's something that it'll be presumed. It would be unusual to get a letter of recommendation, an academic letter of recommendation from somebody that has not taught the student in a class. That would be a fine third letter of recommendation, an external letter of recommendation, an additional teacher letter of recommendation, or a recommendation that could come from a pastor, a coach, an employer, a supervisor, mentor. Some schools will allow for that on Common App. Not everybody, but some will. This would be one of those circumstances, I think. Yeah. Advisor, mentor. Good question. Good. What else? Okay. Good questions as always. Everybody's got good questions. Riley, as I said, is going to be doing a presentation soon, or a couple of them. We're still figuring out the details. But the essays are such a pain, and everybody it's just there's so many questions that are warranted that we want to make sure we cover everything. We do a lot of attention on the essays, as you're seeing, but there's always room for more. I'll do the results from this past year's presentation over the next several weeks. Like I said, very, very good. Surprisingly good. Surprisingly good. How many top 20 privates came back in regular? Not expecting that at all, and surprised at how many CS kids wound up working out for UC. Because last year, as I've told so many of you, last year was, as they say in Spanish, un desastre, a disaster, absolutely terrible as far as CS and EECS is concerned. This year, really, really good. So always something missing. This year, no HYPS, but still tons in the top 20, tons of RD privates in the top 20, and a bunch of UCs that worked out that I wasn't expecting. So, overall, better than expected. But I'll update you on all that over the next several weeks. And good, and we'll do it at the same time as this thing is, because it seems like 4:30 tends to work for people. But I won't keep you any longer. Have a great rest of your day, night. Gabby will send out the copy of this for anybody that wants it or didn't get it. And we'll go from there.